Hello, folks. Welcome in. We'll get started here right around 12. If you want to put in the chat where you're joining us from, we would love to hear it. Welcome, Greg from Wake Forest. Nice to see you today. Colorado, fantastic. Welcome. Hello, Linda from Monroe. It's good to hear Colorado is sunny and not too cold. Yes, absolutely. The sun makes a huge difference. It's been quite cold here compared to normal this year, so we're happy to finally start getting a slight warm up.
Hey,
Hi,
well,
Rebecca. Yes, we can hear you.
has anybody looked at the last slide? Because,
The contact information, is that incorrect?
well, no, it's correct, but it's like emailed and then it's like double emailed. Maybe someone was typing while someone else was trying to edit. I didn't want to
Oh,
fix it if someone else was trying to fix it or if I'm the only one that can see it.
no, go ahead and fix it. Because if it's double email, that's not correct. When I put it in, I thought it was just the one email address. Sorry about that.
Yeah, let me see.
I need to probably stop sharing because I don't know if it can make an edit in real time.
I am trying, I'm trying to make it all like uniformed. There we go. Yeah, it's like ashley.lotta.nc, blah, blah, blah. And then it's like schlee.lotta.
Yeah, let's just make sure that's, thank you, Rebecca, for checking that.
I did not think to add my email to the end, so I'm
No,
assuming you
I
did,
added the
Josh.
contact slide this morning because there wasn't one, and I also wanted to make sure we had the archives email address if people wanted to contact the search room and start requesting some of these materials. So
Space in between hers.
while we
Underline.
get this situated, if you're just coming in to join us, welcome. Feel free to introduce yourself and tell us where you're attending from in the chat. We've got some folks all the way across all over the state and from Colorado so far. So greetings.
Okay, I think we're all good now. It looks good.
Thank you, Rebecca. I'll go ahead and share it then.
Okay.
Welcome from Edenton. Glad to have you here. Like it's about time to get started. We do have a hand raised. Um, there's no handout, Sylvia, but the recording will be available after the fact. And we'll make sure that you can have this recording. And we'll have our email addresses in the slide so that if you want to contact any of us, And we could also put it in the chat if you have questions about a specific collection. Okay, Mr. Orcutt's hand went down. We will take questions. If you want to start putting questions into the chat, we'll try to get through our presentation. That's fine. I appreciate that, Greg. But we'll try to answer the questions when we get to the end of the presentation. Just want to make sure we've got time to cover because we've got a lot of cool stuff last year. We want to tell you about it. If will one of you send a team message to Sherry and see if she needs any technical assistance trying to. All right, I have that it's 12 o'clock. Should we give folks maybe one more minute?
Yeah, that's not always gonna help. Are you ready for another pile of orders? Yeah. The last bit. Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you.
Adrian, is that you right here?
Yes, sorry.
No worries. Do you want to do any introduction since it's time, or do you want me to just dive in?
That's all you. I tried to join with my Gmail account and it still puts me in as a co-host.
It's fine.
Right. Tuning off. I didn't know my audio was on. I'm sorry.
Oh, no worries. Not at all. We're just waiting for Sherry. Hopefully, it's one of our panelists. Hopefully she'll be here momentarily, but she is at the end of the presentation. But we'll go ahead and get started. Welcome, everybody. I am Josh Hager. I am the head of government records description here at the State Archives of North Carolina, and I'd like to welcome you to our New Year, New Collections webinar. Thank you so much for attending. We're going to go over some of the collections that we either acquired or processed in 2024 in the hopes that we can inspire you to do research in those collections. I mean, that is, after all, why we do what we do. So let me introduce our panel today. You'll be hearing first from digital description archivist Caroline Waller about some highlights from government records. Then you'll be hearing from Ashley Lotta Post about some highlights from special collections. You'll be hearing from audiovisual archivist Rebecca Stubbs about new materials in the audiovisual collection. And then you'll be hearing some highlights from the Outer Banks History Center from their director, Tammy Woodward, and from the Western Regional Archives from archivist Sherry Miller. So let's go ahead and jump in here. So as I said, we'll start with government records overview and state agency highlights, then jump into special collections. And by the way, Ashley Lotta Post is the military collections archivist, but she'll give you an update on all the other special collections as well. And then AV, and then our satellite institutions. We'll start with local records. For those of you who are unaware, the State Archives collects county records and state agency records primarily from government agencies all over the state. So last year, in terms of local records, we went to 3 different courthouses to collect records. We did some volumes from Columbus County, but the 2 big transfers were Burke County and Davie County. As you see here on the screen, that's archivist Rashida Felder and I handing over old school shucks, which are unprocessed civil actions, criminal actions from the mid-20th century in the Davie County Courthouse. We received approximately 80 cubic feet, which is 80 boxes worth of records from Davie County, and about the same from Burke County. We also received about 80 volumes from Davie County. So it was quite the large transfer of records, and we thank the folks in those counties for getting us those records. Those court records do precede 1970. So anything 1970 and earlier, if it's an archival series, like civil actions, criminal actions, estates, wills, it might now be here in the archives. We also received some Moore County school censuses and Warren County cohabitation bonds that had previously been in private hands. that we were able to bring back home to government records, and we thank the folks who donated those items back to us. State agency records come in throughout the year. What you're seeing is an image from our records retention schedule, because that dictates which records we can decide, which records we decide to take. We get them throughout the year from all different kinds of agencies, which is why in our presentation on the government records side, we're not going to focus on all those transfers because they're fairly routine. What we're going to focus on is the collections that are processed. And the difference in that is, if you've been to the archive search room, a process collection is the one that's going to be in those smaller gray boxes where the folders are usually done by us. They have labels written by us. There might be a finding aid. There's definitely more information in the online catalog. An unprocessed collection on the state agency side is going to still be in the boxes or digital folders that were arranged by the original agency. We'll have information in docs so that you can find those records, but we haven't touched them after we initially received them. So most of our newer transfers are still unprocessed. Doesn't mean they're not available. They certainly are, and we encourage you to use those. But we're going to go over some of our process materials. And for that, I'd like to turn it over to my colleague, Caroline Waller.
Hi, everyone. As Josh said, I'm Caroline Waller. I'm the digital records description archivist here at the State Archives, working primarily in state agency records. So over 2024, we did so many processing projects. I'm going to try to get through these pretty fast because there's a lot of really interesting ones I want to touch on. But the first one is the Mary Duke Biddle Gallery file. This was in the Museum of Art record group. It's about 9.3 cubic feet, and the materials date from 1957 to 2001. So a lot of our state agency records, the title of the collection or the series, it's not necessarily descriptive of what's in the series. So this is from the Education Department. It's the Mary Duke Biddle Gallery file, and it's within a record group, but we're treating this kind of as its own collection with this processing project. But anyway, this series, it contains the Mary Duke Biddle Gallery for the Blind files, which opened in 1966 in the North Carolina Museum of Art. The gallery ran for 16 years in the old Museum of Art building on Morgan Street. This was an experimental touch and feel exhibit that allowed patrons who were blind or who had other visual impairments to have a tactile and interactive experience with the art. So in the series, we found correspondence, loan and exhibition information, administrative records, programming and training files, financial records, photographs, really kind of the gamut of all types of materials and formats that you can find. And we found that these materials really provide a snapshot of the history of this gallery and the early services for those with disabilities in North Carolina, as well as the different debates surrounding accessibility during this time period. So we have some of the photos we found in this series on the slide. These are all images from the gallery. They did switch exhibits about every 6 weeks, so you can see that there's different themes. One of the photos, you see a lot of musical instruments. There was like a music around the world gallery exhibit. There was ones on like famous busts and figures. And then later, sound was incorporated into this gallery, and a dozen docents were trained in sign language to allow for lectures for deaf persons to be incorporated into the programming. And we really want to highlight how the history of this gallery, because I think it's a really interesting part of North Carolina history. It did inspire other similar galleries around the world. There was a similar gallery installed in South Africa, in the Soviet Union. And at its height, the gallery averaged more than 80,000 visitors a year. These visitors, of course, not only being from North Carolina, but also from all around the world. So one of our favorite parts of this collection is the photographs. Josh, if you want to go to the next slide, we can see some more. So on this slide, you can see photographs not just from the gallery, but also some of the different programming that pertain to the gallery. On the left side, you see some students from the North Carolina Governor Moorhead School of the Blind meeting with Ray Charles on the Garner Road campus in 1968. So it's important to note that the North Carolina Moorhead School for the Blind, it wasn't integrated until the 1970s. So during this time, this was the African American campus for the school. And then on the right, there's a photo of students feeling the muscles of dance students as they're demonstrating different ballet positions. This educational program for the Moorhead School students, this was in tandem with an exhibition with the gallery called Posed Figures. So the blind students took field trips to the North Carolina School of the Arts in Winston-Salem, where they learned about dance and drama from student instructors. Also in the series, we found several records written in Braille, and we were able to get in touch with folks at the North Carolina Accessible Books Library, and they let us come in, tour the stacks. It was really awesome. We got to see all of the different services that they had, and they walked us through how they, serve North Carolinians. And then through this, they put us in touch with some volunteers, and these volunteers helped us translate the Braille documents. So now the translations of the Braille documents are part of this series. All right, next slide. Another series we had a lot of fun processing in 2024 is the North Carolina Symphony Record Group Photographs file. And again, this title of this series is kind of a misnomer, as is with a lot of state agency records. But again, this series, it belongs to the North Carolina Symphony Record Group, and it contains photographs and other types of audiovisual materials relating to the publicity and the activities of the North Carolina Symphony from the 1940s to the 1980s. On this slide, you can see an image of a scrapbook page. This scrapbook, it was disassembled, but we photographed it in-house before we disassembled it because it was deteriorating and falling apart. Also on the slide, you see scans of photographic slides. There were books of slides with photographs that we had digitized in-house. So on the slide, you can see materials that you would expect to find in a photograph file. But upon opening some of the unprocessed boxes, we found all types of audiovisual materials. And we can see a photo of those materials on the next slide. On this slide, there's a photo of all of these reels that we found, or tapes that we found in these boxes. And we discovered that these are quadruplex videotapes. These are 2-inch videotapes that were developed for broadcast television in the late 1950s. This format, it fell out of fashion when the development of more practical analog tape formats were developed in the 1970s and the 1980s. The ones that we have, we believe, are from the late 1970s, 1980s, and we're estimating we have about 80 minutes of footage in total. And we don't know exactly what's on these tapes. We just know what's written on the reels. But we are assuming that they're promos from local television stations about the symphony. One tape, it says that they're scenes from the Nutcracker Ballet that the production that they do every year. And then also there's a 60-minute tape that we think is a broadcast of a performance. So these tapes, along with a 16 millimeter film reel, we're not able to digitize in-house. So we currently have it sent out to a vendor for digitization. And hopefully those will be back any day now. But also other audiovisual collections that we found, or audiovisual materials that we found with this collection, are 1/4-inch reel-to-reel audio tapes from the 1970s, and then several U-matic videotapes from the 1980s, which we were able to digitize in-house. So hopefully once everything is back from the vendor and digitized, hopefully in the future we will be able to have all these materials become part of our digital collections. All right, next slide. So this collection, the Learning Institute of North Carolina, it's been on our radar for a while because we think this collection is very interesting from a historical and research standpoint. However, it's not accessible to patrons at all. This collection, it was selected as a priority at the beginning of 2024, and we're going to continue working on it throughout 2025, maybe into 2026. And that's because this is quite a large undertaking. The collection in total, it's 86 cubic feet. It came in 86 of these large letter boxes. So it's going to take a long time for us to finish. I estimate in 2024, we finished about 1/3 of the processing of the collection. And even though it's not finished, I want to highlight it in this presentation, not only because we've spent so much time on it this year, but also because we think this collection is going to be really high research value in the future and will be utilized frequently by researchers. So a brief history of the Learning Institute of North Carolina. It originated out of the North Carolina Fund, which was an independent organization announced in the early 1960s during the administration of Governor Terry Sanford. The North Carolina Fund launched various projects throughout the state with the purpose of breaking the cycle of poverty by addressing its causes. So the Learning Institute of North Carolina, or LINC as we call it, was created in 1964 to continue the educational efforts of the North Carolina Fund. Terry Sanford, who you see on the screen, he was the chairman for the North Carolina Fund and signed LINC's founding charter. And from its beginning in 1964 until 1974, LINC received funding from the state. And in 1965, the General Assembly passed an act that recognized LINC's charter, permitting various state agencies and institutions to enter into contracts and agreements with the Institute. So LINC is a really interesting institution because it's kind of like in the gray area between a state agency and then also kind of its own organization. And we have it here in our state agency records. So an example of one of these contracts is the State Board of Education in North Carolina contracted with LINC for the operation of the North Carolina Advancement School. You can see a photo of the Advancement School at the bottom of the slide. The Advancement School was a residential school to serve academic underachievers. I believe it was only for boys. I'm still getting into the record, so that will be confirmed once processing is finished. But during the 1960s and the 1970s, LINC developed various other pilot programs, and once the workability of these programs had been demonstrated, LINC turned them over to the state agency for continued operation. And another example of this is a teacher in-service training program that worked alongside a pilot kindergarten project. So over the years, LINC expanded its scopes to include fields such as child advocacy, juvenile corrections, and a daycare for children of high school students. And then in 1979, the General Assembly repealed the 1965 Act that recognized the charter, and it canceled LINC's contracts with state agencies and institutions. So that's why we have these group of records for this 1 decade. It was kind of a short-lived entity, but it did a lot of interesting things with education and early pioneering education efforts in North Carolina. And even though it's not fully processed at the moment, if anyone's interested in utilizing the collection right now, I'm happy to help facilitate that. But I'm hoping by this time next year, we'll be much closer to having a fully processed and accessible collection. All right, next slide. There should be another slide.
Sorry, I will try to find that other slide.
Yeah. It had a list of a lot of the series that were with the low-level radioactive waste stuff.
Yeah. It just got moved to after this. Let me try to fix that.
Thank you.
No, it's showing on mine. Sorry, y'all.
I have the desktop version open, and I can see it on the desktop version if you wanted me to start sharing instead.
Yeah, please go ahead and feel free, Rebecca. Thank you.
Yes, as soon as I figure out how to share my screen in Zoom. I was like, I have it in Teams. I know how to do it in Teams, but we're in Zoom.
I've got it ready, Rebecca, if you'd like.
You got it.
Okay.
Thanks, Rebecca.
I tried.
There we go.
Okay, yeah, I can see it now. All right, so the final group of records I want to talk about is the low-level radioactive waste management authority records. So like state agency records, this isn't one single collection. It's actually various series, 12 series to be exact, in the administration record group. But I thought this project is really illustrative of kind of the trend that we've been doing in government records, where we've been having to do a lot of processing upon patron request. So this group of series, 12 series in the administration record group, was around 64 cubic feet of materials. And this project, it was started because we had a patron request access, and because these records contain so much confidential information regarding technology, in government facilities, we knew we had to do some level of minimal processing in order to facilitate this access. So what are these records? In 1980, Congress passed the Low-Level Radioactive Waste Policy Act, in which they made each state responsible for the disposal of all the waste generated within their borders. And a few years later, North Carolina joined the Southeast Interstate Low-Level Radioactive Waste Management Compact. There's a lot of acronyms involved in processing this collection. So it joins in a compact with all these southeastern states. And then in 1986, the compact chose North Carolina as a host state for one of these facilities. So at this time, the Low-Level Radioactive Waste Management Authority in North Carolina was created, and thus these records began to be created, and that's why we have these. And at this point, there begins a 12-year-long effort to create and establish a facility in North Carolina. So spoiler, this facility was never actually created. It was eventually defeated, and the authority was abolished in 2000. But this effort was not only directed by this federal mandate, it was also directed by states' leaders' interest in continued economic growth, as well as a commitment to the state's public health and environment. So although this facility was never built, I think this effort and the records pertaining to this effort speak to a larger story of North Carolina's 20th century efforts and continuing efforts to promote economic growth and attract industry to the state. So I hope not only this researcher, but other researchers will find these materials of interest as well. And also I want to shout out that this was not just our unit doing all of this work. This was an archives-wide effort to make these records accessible. We had our public services staff also helping us review all the records for confidential information. So that is all I have for y'all today. I guess we're going to hand it over to Rebecca.
Ashley, sorry.
Yes, Ashley, sorry.
Yeah, so I'm going to talk a little bit about special collections and what we've been up to. And then Rebecca and Tammy and Sherry are going to share a little bit about their individual units, but a little bit about special collections kind of as a whole. What makes us kind of different from government records is that we collect the private and unofficial historical records relating to the history of North Carolina. So essentially, if it's not government records, it's special collections, for lack of a kind of better description, non-government entities. So we're collecting the stories of the people of North Carolina, which can take a lot of different forms. So we have it broken down into many different units, including 2 satellite branches, one in the Outer Banks and one in Asheville, who are each going to give descriptions of what they've been up to in the past year. If you can go to the next slide. But I'm going to kick it off with private collections. This is the largest unit in special collections. They essentially collect the records of individuals and families, a bunch of different entities throughout North Carolina's history, dating from the colonial era all the way up until pretty much modern day. It varies widely as to, what you can find in these private collections, in terms of topics and in terms of the actual records themselves. A typical collection could have anything from letters and diaries to speeches, poems, ledgers, financial papers, etc. But one really cool one that we came across last year was in the Archibald Macmillan collection. Our private collections archivist came across this book of arithmetic, which in and of itself is kind of cool, but it was also really unique in that it was found among a collection of primarily correspondence and financial papers. And there's kind of a mystery in that we don't really know why this book of arithmetic was in that collection. He doesn't know, can't really figure out who he wrote it for, if he wrote it for himself. The individual was a farmer. If he wrote it for his children, if he wrote it, we don't know. So just kind of a cool random find within a collection that he processed in 2024. So yeah. And then next we have the organization's records. These are records of private, professional, and civic groups from around the state. Some examples kind of include the League of Women Voters, American Legion, Alpha Kappa Alpha, the Gardeners of Wake County, all sorts of different groups. Again, varies widely as to the topics, but it's primarily things like minutes and administrative records. But a really interesting group that whose records were processed or brought in and processed last year were those of the Book Club of Fayetteville. This is a group that was actually established in 1894, and they have met continuously since their founding. So they are still actually meeting today. I think the only time they have taken any sort of break was during the COVID pandemic. But yeah, so we have the minutes and then scrapbooks and photographs from this group. And this was one that the organization's archivist and one of our interns had a really good time digging into. They had obviously over 100 years of materials to go through, and seeing the evolution of the group was a really interesting time for them. So, yeah. And then next we have our oral history unit. The oral history unit preserves the lived memory of the state. They have been very busy over the last year, collecting, connecting, and preserving all of these memories. They have been adding to the School Integration, American Indian Heritage Commission, and Private Collections oral history projects. All of these are actually ongoing projects. So definitely if you think that you would be a good fit for them, or if you know somebody that would be a good fit to be a part of these projects, please reach out to the oral historian, John Haran. He is always keeping an eye out for individuals who, would like to participate in these oral histories. Also, a ton of these oral histories have been added to our digital collections in the past year. He being our oral historian has in the upcoming year in 2025 a lunch and learn coming up where he's going to touch on them, so I'm not going to mention specific oral histories. You'll have to stay tuned for those. But yeah, he has a lot of really interesting oral histories that he's done over the last year. So yeah. All right. And then the military collection, which is the collection I am, or the unit I am a part of, has materials that document the history of North Carolina's involvement in the military or in military conflicts. We have things dating from the colonial era all the way up till current day modern conflicts, primarily things like correspondence, photographs, and reminiscences. We do also have a veterans oral history program. Again, if you are a veteran in North Carolina or know a veteran in North Carolina, would like to share your story, please definitely reach out. We are always looking for individuals who would like to participate. Yeah, go to the next slide. But yeah, one particular collection that I processed last year that I want to highlight in a little bit more detail is the May and Elizabeth Jones papers. This is a collection of two sisters from Asheville who both ended up serving in some capacity during World War I. They volunteered both in the YMCA, but also in other ways. So they were actually born in Raleigh, but moved to Asheville when they were young. Elizabeth was in England when the war broke out and immediately joined the YMCA and started volunteering. She volunteered with in what are called huts. They're essentially organizations that boosted soldiers' morale. They're places where soldiers could rest and recuperate. They, would put on concerts and games and movies. They would also have distinctly American products, things that would remind soldiers of home, things like ice cream and chewing gum and American magazines. And she worked in one of the most famous or the most famous hut in England, which is called the Eagle Hut, which is those photographs down at the bottom are of the Eagle Hut. She also was a part of the American Ladies Red Cross Aid Committee, which is a mouthful, but it's a group that assisted the American and the British Red Cross groups in logistical and financial support. So she would raise money for the American Red Cross and for individual soldiers. So she was hugely involved in the war effort in England. And then her older sister, May, was a local chairman with the National League for Women's Service in Asheville. And she helped to establish the Asheville Community Cannery, which was actually located behind the Buncombe County Courthouse. That photo at the top is of the cannery. And they would can vegetables and produce, both to preserve for the war effort and also to send abroad. So they ended up canning thousands and thousands of pounds of produce for the war effort. And then in 1918, she traveled to France and served as a canteen worker and a hut secretary for the YMCA. So she served with the Wildcat Division, traveling throughout France, and cooked for the soldiers and organized morale boosting activities, and remained with them until May of 1919. So this is a collection that I absolutely found fascinating. It was probably my favorite of the year, so I absolutely had to share it. Yeah. So I'm gonna toss it over to Rebecca.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Rebecca Stubbs, and as Josh mentioned earlier, I am the AV archivist for the AV unit within the Special Collections section. I'm just going to jump right into it. The AV unit collects, protects, preserves, and makes accessible AV materials relating to North Carolina's history. We tend to reference requests. It is not just myself over here. I also have my colleague Ian Dunn, and together we run the AV unit. On this main screen, I just have a few examples of what we do have in our collections in terms of the varieties. We have different size film, different size reels. We have a variety of sound and video formats. As Caroline stated earlier, there's U-matics, and a U-matic is actually on the screen. It is the biggest VHS I've ever seen in my life. And down at the bottom right corner, we have a lantern slide, which is basically a glass plate, a miniature glass plate. So next. Thank you. One of the collections that we brought in 2024 is PHC 303, the Elizabeth Fenn Photograph Collection. This collection depicts African-American churches, cemeteries, and other minority cemeteries throughout all of North Carolina. The photographer chiefly did focus on Cumberland County, but we also have Orange County, Wake, Wayne, Robeson. And what's interesting about this collection is that I'm still in the middle of processing it, so it's on my desk. So I actually have a little bit of a show and tell. So this is how the slides came in this really thick, crinkly plastic, not very archival safe for today's terms. And we are putting them into thinner polyethylene types of plastic. This will ensure that the film itself is protected for years to come, and then we'll properly rehouse it. Some of the images on the screen are from the collection itself. And I just really enjoy processing this collection because not only did you get to see these underrepresented sites, but you get to see the beauty and the innovation that came with people burying their loved ones back in the day. We have in the bottom right corner, that circle is actually a tire wheel without the actual tire. The rim is a rim of a tire. And then we also have a guitar, which I just thought really like brought out the creativity and the beauty within death. Even though it's tragic, it can be very beautiful. And then we just have like an overlay of how the slides originally came. And then I did not put it in the slide, but there is an image from New Orleans in this collection of Marie Laveau's tomb and gravesite in the French Quarter. Not only did Elizabeth take photographs of North Carolina, but she also took photographs in Tennessee, in Texas, and in New Orleans as well. Next. Thanks. This collection has a very interesting backstory, which just got updated this morning.
I'm
So
hotspotting on my
PHC
phone.
310 is John M. and Caridwin Phelps photograph collection from the 1960s. Their grandson, John Phelps Jr., donated this collection just a few months ago, and the physical represents 2 vinyl records of Dr. Phelps' eulogy. He served for the House of Representatives and the North Carolina GA. What is interesting in this collection is that when the donor first came to us, he had mentioned that through family history telling, the story was that Dr. Phelps passed away suddenly on the Senate floor. It not true. He unfortunately did not pass on the floor. He did pass at home, and I found the resolution this morning from the House Joint Resolution, and I just thought that that was really important to note how even though stories are being told through the generations, there is that slight miscommunication or misconception through history. So it's always kind of important to go backwards and just double check. And another interesting fact for this collection is that his wife, Caridwin, was sworn in 4 days after his passing by Governor Terry Sanford to take his place until the end of his term. And we actually have not only the physical copies for all of this material, but we also have the digitized copies of all of this material as well. Everything is open for research, just the digital portion is still undergoing its necessary steps. Next. Next. Thanks. Some additional collections that we got in 2024, with the exception of one. We did receive a donation of courthouses. A photographer went out between 1980 and 2000 and took a picture of every single North Carolina courthouse and donated it. We also have some panoramas from the Democratic Club of North Carolina from 43 to 69. We also have a few images depicting women operating the telephone switchboards from the 1950s in Wilmington. And another notable one that we actually received or accessioned in 2024 was the Heck Andrews House photograph collection. These are staff photos that were taken when staff went to go clean out the house after all the families and everything had moved out. This home was completed by Colonel Jonathan Heck, who is an industrialist, a lawyer, and a real estate developer in 1872. The family lived in this home for more than 30 years before the son of the railroad baron, Alex Boyd Andrews, moved in. Andrews did some renovations to the house, stayed in the house for a couple of decades before Mrs. Julia Russell bought it in 1948 with her daughter Gladys Perry. Gladys Perry is the infamous ghost of Blunt Street. She was the woman who would pancake on white foundation, lipstick, trench coat, and dig through what some people call trash, but other people call treasures. So we do have the inside of that home before anything was actually done to it. And then we do have PHC 309, which is the Bernita Reed Digital Video Collection. Bernita is a videographer, a historian, an archivist, an author. She's a jack of all trades when it comes to the history field. She did a stint at UNC Chapel Hill, and she's currently working in Greensboro with an outreach community place. And she has gone out into the community, to underrepresented communities, to document important speeches and events and just life in the community for future research. And then the News and Observer photograph collection we actually got in 2018, 2019 in different phases. However, I wanted to mention that this is an ongoing process in collection, and that Ian has single-handedly added approximately 3,364 lines of metadata to our database for patron research and patron access for this collection. Yeah, I just thought that was really important to note. We have approximately 3,500 new lines of code for this one collection, which is amazing. And with that being said, I'm going to pass it off to Tammy over at the OBHC.
Thank you, Rebecca. As Josh mentioned earlier, my name is Tammy Woodward. I'm the director of the Outer Banks History Center. We are the Eastern Satellite Branch of the State Archives of North Carolina. We're located in Manio on Roanoke Island, and we're staffed by 3 full-time archivists. We collect the history of Eastern North Carolina, primarily the history sort of along the counties along the coast. So while we took in several collections throughout 2024, processed several collections with the help of, we have a summer intern each year as well. There's one that I really want to highlight from 2024, which is the Elizabeth City Cotton Mill records, because this is one of those rare examples where with special collections, you often have your collections walking in the door. You're dealing with donors in the archives or in the History Center. It's not every day that you get to go into someone's attic, or you get to go into someone's basement, or, you know, pack up their house, or go into a business or an organization and you choose what you want to take in. And the Elizabeth City Cotton Mill was sort of that kind of situation. As you can kind of see, I took lots and lots of photographs as I was packing and going through each room of the beautiful mill. So in October 2024, I was contacted by Wanda Lassiter and Carrie Barker, who are the curators for the Museum of the Albemarle in Elizabeth City. They had received word that the Elizabeth City Cotton Mill building was to be sold to a developer who would renovate it into condominiums, much like the Edenton Cotton Mill has already been done a few years ago. They also said that we had about 2 weeks before the sale went through to visit the mill building and pack up any artifacts or any records that we wanted donated to the museum and to the state archives. And so we immediately scheduled a site visit with the donor and the local historian who had actually tipped us off that the building was getting sold. And then Wanda, Carrie, and their museum carpenter, Matt, we all went to the site. I believe Don Pendergrast as well, who's their director of the museum. We walked the site, went through every room, every office, and just kind of assessed where the records were, where, you know, the artifacts were. And basically, where the Museum of the Albemarle, we're looking at 3-dimensional objects, you know, machinery, artifacts, brooms, you know, the carts that they would use to move the cotton and the thread around. I was looking for archival records. So any kind of paper records, anything that would represent the business history. So our first site visit lasted about 4 hours and included a tour of that beautifully preserved factory building, as you can see in the photos. We went through its offices, walked through the grounds, storage buildings. During the first visit, I packed up enough business ledgers and boxes of records to fill up my car, which prompted a discussion to plan a second site visit to collect the remaining materials. Between the 2 site visits to the site, I spent around 8 hours packing the records into banker's boxes. That top right-hand photo, Carrie took a picture of me digging through one of the old desks that had not been touched since probably the 1960s. Again, it was like walking through a time capsule. In between the 2 site visits, I ended up packing up about 30 cubic feet of records, or 2.5 Subaru car loads that basically represented the mill's operations. The mill was designed and built in 1895 by Charles Hall Robinson. You can see that lower photograph. That's only half of the mill. I didn't take a picture of the right-hand side, and it pretty much runs about 3 city blocks in Elizabeth City, if you've ever seen it. So it's a massive facility. It was designed in 1895 by Charles Hall Robinson and operated under 4 generations of the Robinson family, first as the Elizabeth City Hosiery Company and the Elizabeth City Knitting Mills, and later as the Elizabeth City Cotton Mill. The 1895 mill ceased operations in 2008 and was one of the chief employers in Elizabeth City, especially the African-American population of Elizabeth City. At its peak during World War II, it employed around 400 workers in 24-hour shifts. What is so amazing about the Elizabeth City Cotton Mill records is that the owners kept very detailed records of their employees, payroll, accounts payable and receivable, the mill's production of cotton thread and yarn, stock certificates and records of their stockholders, and other business records in ledgers and wooden filing cabinets that together tell the story of the company's history and provide details of the workers who lived in the surrounding communities. They also kept a collection of literature on the early 20th century cotton industry, which I was able to collect and preserve. The collection also features architectural drawings of the building and aerial photographs of the mill, as well as other mills in Elizabeth City. I believe there was one in downtown. The detailed records I collected overall pretty much provide a complete picture of the mill's operations. So between the 3-dimensional artifacts and, the machinery that was collected by the Museum of the Albemarle, and then the business records that are now going to be preserved by the State Archives at the Outer Banks History Center, this donation provides not only a detailed business history of, a thriving North Carolina company that operated for 113 years, but it also provides, that hidden kind of genealogical records, industry history, company history, and just a community history for all of the people that have worked there or retired from that organization. So the collection is not yet processed. You can see in the lower right-hand corner everything that I collected. Couple of, like I said, lots of bankers boxes, and then the ledgers were just, very large, oversized ledgers. But once it's processed, I think it'll be a treasure trove of information, not just for, economic historians, city historians, or business historians, but also genealogists, because the records of the employees are fantastic. It provides information on, job titles, their income, going back to 1895, which is really interesting. So thank you. I think I'll now turn it over to Sherry.
Thanks, Tammy. I'm here at the Western Regional Archives. We take the opposite end of the state from Tammy, the Western counties, and we're located in Asheville. I'm going to talk about the Garden family papers. On the first slide here, we see a young Geneva garden. The Garden family papers came to the Western Regional Archives last year. They're donated by James Lawton Haney Jr. He's a 3rd cousin of Geneva Gardens. This collection contains letters written between 1912 and 1914 from Geneva Corpening Garden to David Jesse Hunt, plus other correspondence of the Garden and Halliburton families and genealogical material relating to these and allied families of McDowell County, North Carolina. The love letters that I'll tell you about are from the beginning of their courtship, when Reverend Hunt was 48 compared to Geneva's 22 years of age. By this time, Reverend Hunt had been a widower for a decade and also had a daughter, Mary Sue, who was in her late teens. Reverend Hunt was an ordained minister, a Baptist minister, and had been the principal of the Union Mills Academy, where Geneva had gone to school for her high school level education. He was a longtime family friend who occasionally stayed at Geneva's family's boarding house. We only see Geneva's side of the correspondence, and next slide, please. This first letter was written in response to Reverend Hunt's request to call upon Geneva. His request was an announcement of his intention to end the pupil, teacher, and family friend relationship and enter into a special relationship, with air quotes. Miss Garden and Reverend Hunt had a system where they would write to each other weekly and send it along on the train. Geneva's brother-in-law, Adolphus Poteet, or Dolly, would deliver letters to her when they arrived on the train. This first letter is dated August 12, 1912, where she replies that she would be glad to have him call tonight. I'm sure this consisted of porch sitting and walks near the orchard, nothing too risque. Next slide. In October of 1912, she refers back to how they met and how their courtship started. She had fallen into a ditch on an outing and Reverend Hunt had helped her up. Something must have sparked because by summer's end, he was asking to stop by. Since the Garden family home was a boarding house, you can imagine that people passing through and scheduled visitors were a central topic of the letters. Who's who and who's doing what? Relatively mundane gossip, of which this relationship was a hot topic for others in the community. Geneva sidestepped the remarks and continued on with her correspondence. These early 1910s letters also speak of the weather and illnesses in the household and community, including consumption, pneumonia, mumps, rheumatism, smallpox, measles, whooping cough, colds, and la grippe, which is the flu, within the letter's 2-year span. All the letters are signed off as best wishes, good wishes, or your friend Geneva, until, next slide, late spring of 1914. That is when they professed their love for one another, and letters are now signed lovingly Geneva. Scandalous, I know. But don't worry, by summer, next slide, this 14-karat gold Tiffany mounted pearl ring is ordered and delivered by July. This was before the De Beers Diamond Company started their A Diamond is Forever campaign in the mid-1940s. Pearls were welcome. And by fall, next, this comes out, the wedding invite for December 24th, 1914. Our last letter in the series is dated December 22nd, 1914. After that, they didn't really need to mail letters to each other, did they? Next. Here is the loving couple later in their marriage. They would go on to have 4 children, 3 girls and a boy, born between 1916 and 1922. Unfortunately, Geneva would pass away in 1923 from a difficult bout of measles, followed by pneumonia. She was 33 years old. Reverend Hunt would live for 9 more years and pass away at the age of 68. The children were then aged 10 to 16 years old and would be raised by Geneva's mother, their grandmother, who was only 2 years older than their father. Hope you've enjoyed the story of Geneva and David's courtship and marriage. The last of their children passed away in 2013, but they still have many relatives in the Western North Carolina area. Thank you.
Thanks to all of you for that fantastic content. We've got a few minutes for questions, and there are already some questions in the Q&A. But if you have any, please feel free to add them to the Q&A or to the chat. We'll start with the first question. It's for Ashley. What does the number mean after the collection name? For May and Elizabeth Jones, it was 182. Is this the number that will be helpful if I request the records in the search room?
Yes, that would be very helpful when you're requesting records. So it's just kind of a way to organize records, especially within the military collection. We organize them by conflict and then the number. All of the all of the collections have them. It's just kind of a way to organize them. In addition to the collection's name, you have the number as well. It's just sequential, I believe.
Yeah, and each kind of record has a different kind of what we call call number. So military collections are one kind, audiovisuals might be different. State agency records are kind of complicated because it might have a couple different call numbers depending on when it was transferred and is it processed. But the search room staff can help you navigate those numbers. So if you give them all the numbers you have, you can find in doc, then they will tell you which one is the one that we need to find it. But yes, in general, those numbers are going to be helpful. Sometimes there are numbers that are no longer used, but again, the search room staff can sort of steer you in the direction of what's needed. The next question is for Rebecca. The Enterno photograph collection, does it include photographs taken by photographers that work for the News and Observer, but that they did not necessarily publish?
Yes. Back in the day, newspapers were the TV news, like they were your live at 5. So even though the newspaper may have only published a frame or 2, there is a good chance that there is an entire roll or reel of film relating to that specific topic or whatever topic was being covered that day. But yes, the only issue with the N&O is that we do house it. We allow people to see it. However, copyright still lies with the N&O. So it is still frowned upon to use their images without express permission from the N&O. But if you needed the contact information, just shoot me an email.
Thank you, Rebecca. Our next question is for Tammy. Barbara in the chat says a relative of hers worked at the Elizabeth City hosiery mill in 1938. She lives in Raleigh, but she wants to know, do you have personnel records as part of the transfer? And if so, can she request it remotely, or does she need to do the research in person at the OVHC?
Either way, actually, we are currently closed for renovations through the beginning of March. The Outer Banks History Center is getting a much needed facelift, but we are doing remote reference. And with a question this fairly simple, we could probably do remote anyway once we open. So yes, the collection's not yet processed, but I packed it, so I kind of remember everything, where everything is. So if you can send me an email with your ancestors' details, as much information as you can supply, like, names, nicknames, anything like that, the years you may think that he or she would have worked there. I'm happy to look for those for you. And it just may take me, some time to dig through them and get back to you. But yes, I'm more than happy to help you with that, especially since we're closed for renovations at the moment.
Thank you, Tammy. Last question, I think, is for probably Adrian on the back end or anybody else who on the outreach side. It looks like previously one of our employees sent acquisitions list to the North Carolina Genealogical Society. Is anyone still doing that, or is that something that we can do? I know I thought something that would fall under my purview. So if not, we certainly can follow up and ask the folks that would be doing that.
Adrian answered in the chat that they
Okay.
haven't done so lately, but they can certainly do that.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Tammy. We have a comment in the chat for Yay Genealogist. Absolutely. I think that was in reference to Sherry's presentation, that we had a lot of great information about the family, and kudos to the genealogists who find that sort of information. And that is something, acquisitions are also published in our biannual report. Elizabeth points that out in the chat. Elizabeth is our organizational records archivist. Thank you, Elizabeth, for pointing that out. But I do want to mention, as has been said, a lot of these collections have obvious historical value, but they also have genealogical value, even if they're not obvious genealogical materials. When you think of genealogy, you probably think of those local court records that I started the presentation with. But a lot of these other records have just as much genealogical value, particularly, Tammy's a fantastic case. If your family is from Elizabeth City area, then some of these records from the cotton mill are going to be right up your alley. There might be a photo of your ancestor's grave in the collection that Rebecca told us about. So there's definitely genealogical significance and historical significance. There's also legal significance. People use our collections for, media productions all the time. So as long as you're using the records, we're happy about it, and we're happy to help you with those records. We have great presentation. Thank you so much in the chat. Thank you. We're glad you enjoyed. And then thank you so much. Hope this can be a semi-regular. I'm glad to hear that. If there is good feedback, we might be able to do this as a yearly event where we can tell you all about the new things that we've got acquisitioned or newly processed. It is now almost 1 o'clock. So if there's any last minute questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. Otherwise, I'd like to thank all of our panelists for contributions today. The email addresses are on the screen, and please reach out to us or to the archive search room to get the research started in these collections and let your research journey begin. Have a great rest of your day, everybody. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.